circumstances, and that God is even greater than your weaknesses as well. And today we want to continue that, but I want to share with you guys that faith is actually being strange. Faith is being strange, right? And God is calling you to be strange. Amen? Amen. No, you guys are like, I don't really get what you're talking about yet, right? So, honestly, for me, I'm just going to let you guys know a little bit about me. I grew up in Indonesia. I'm a Korean. I grew up in Indonesia, and I don't know how many times I shared this story, but I spent 18 years of my life in Indonesia. Ever since I was 6 months old, I stayed in Indonesia, and then I came to Korea after I was an adult. And for any of you guys who are not Korean, how many of you guys are not fully Korean? All right, most of you guys, right? When I first came to Korea, I wasn't really Korean either, right? Literally, when people would come to me and talk in Korean to me, I'd get so scared. And the first thing that I'd say is, 죄송한데 한국말 잘 못해서, right? And they were like, what? Like, you're weird, right? you look Korean, how come you can't speak Korean, right? But I would literally say that, and I'd speak to them in English, right? They're like, oh, don't talk to me in Korean, right? But I lived most of my life overseas, and for any of you guys who are going into a foreign country for the first time, if Korea is the first foreign country that you've gone to, how does it feel to be different from everybody else?
Really strange.
Kind of strange, right? Kind of strange. Even though at first that's how I started out, for the next few years, I tried my best to fit into life in Korea. I wanted to, do everything the same way that Koreans do. I wanted to be able to say, speak in a way that sounded Korean, right? I wanted to dress Korean. I wanted to do everything Korean. And the first thing that I did was I went to military, right? And when I went to military, I tried my best not to stick out, right? I didn't understand the words that they were saying. I didn't understand anything. I had to watch what people were doing. And I was like, okay, it looks like everyone's supposed to turn left. And so I just turned left with them, right? But, being strange is not a very comfortable feeling. And for me too, I gotta be honest with you guys, I hate being strange. I hate being the one who sticks out. And my time in Korea, I tried so hard to adjust to life in Korea, to become Korean, right? To be more Korean, to be more like everybody else. And it's very uncomfortable to be that person that's different. But if you know something about the Bible invites you and me, invites us to actually be people who are different from the rest of the world. And so, as much as we don't like the idea of being strange, if you call yourself a person who wants to be a person of faith, if you're like, I want to be like Abraham, I want to be a man, I want to be a woman of faith, guess what? You have to get used to the idea of being strange. Amen? Amen. And as we're looking at the life of Abraham, you realize that Abraham was a very strange man. He was not like the usual person in that time. He had to come out of that lifestyle and live a new life that was very strange for the people around him. But that was God's invitation for him to live a life of faith. And so if we look at the passage today, as we try to become people of faith, it leads us to become people who are strange in our ambitions and who are strange in our confidence. So let's just take a look at the passage for today. It's actually a longer passage. It's from Genesis 13. Let's read it together, right? Actually, I'll read it for you guys. You can follow along. And it says this. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abraham had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abraham called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we're close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, "Look around from where you are to the north and south, to the east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron. There he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. Amen. I just want to quickly remind you guys that I'm probably going to just refer to Abram as Abraham the rest of today, all right? So, if there's any confusion, why does the Bible say Abram and why does he say Abraham? It's because later his name changes to Abraham, all right? So I'm just going to call him Abraham, right? But today we're kind of continuing off of where we left off last week. And if you remember last week, where was Abraham and Sarah and Lot? They were in the land of Egypt, right? They actually were in the land of Canaan, exactly as God commanded them to be. But if you guys remember in chapter 12, it said that there was a famine in Canaan. And so because of the famine, Abraham takes his family and they go to Egypt, right? To kind of hide out until the famine is gone. If you guys remember, we talked about how going to Egypt, Abraham was a very smart guy. He was a very crafty guy, right? He didn't want to die, and so he tricked Pharaoh and said, "This is not my wife, this is my sister," right? And he wasn't lying, he was his half-sister, right? But anyways, we talked about how that was not a good thing necessarily. It wasn't a good thing. And as we're starting this passage in verses 1 through 4, what's interesting is the Bible, I want to let you guys know, when you're reading this passage, it's not like a sermon. The Bible isn't going to tell you like Abraham sinned and did this wrong, and so you guys who are reading this, you guys shouldn't live like this, right? The Bible won't tell you that, right? It won't say, "Oh, Abraham did a good job here, and you guys who are reading this, you guys need to live like this," right? It's kind of like almost a Bible. You have to figure out what it's really trying to say, right? And what you see right here in verses 1 through 4 is, it says, "So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had." So he leaves Egypt behind and he goes back to Negev. And in verse 2 it says, "Abraham had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai." This is where it's important. "Where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abraham called on the name of the Lord." Abraham, he was in Canaan. God told him to stay in Canaan. A famine came, and so he, being smart, ran away to Egypt. But after his whole thing in Egypt, the Bible doesn't say, and then Abraham repented, right? But what happens is Abraham goes back to Canaan, to the place where he was earlier, where God told him to be. And it says that he comes and seeks the Lord's face. And what you see is, it seems like Abraham is saying, "I made a mistake going to Egypt. Now I'm really going to trust God. I'm going to stay in Canaan, even though this, circumstances are tough. I'm going to trust God to provide for me. I'm going to stay here. God told me to come here." Right? That's where we're starting. But there's a problem that comes back when Abraham and Lot and his family all come back. And the problem we see in verse 5 is it says, "Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, but the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And so quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at the time. So Abram said to Lot, 'Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we're close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left.'" Right? So what's interesting is they left Egypt, they came back to Canaan. Did anything get solved? There was a famine in the land, that's why they went to Egypt, and they come back and the same problem is there. Abraham's back in Canaan doing exactly what God wanted him to do, and the same problem is there. They don't have enough resources for Abraham and Lot to be there. And so it's back to square one. It's back to the same problem, but it's kind of like they have a second chance now. What is Abraham going to do, right? And so what happens is Abraham tells Lot, "Hey, you choose where you want to go. I'm going to go the other direction. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." And so Lot, what does he do? He looks around, he sees the Jordan, and he goes to that land, right? Now, as I was reading this passage, as I was thinking about it, I did a lot of studying on this passage, and a lot of the commentators, a lot of the people that research this passage, what they say is, be careful not to make Lot a bad guy. All right, they're like, hey, the Bible never says that Lot was sinful necessarily, so be careful not to make Lot this evil guy, right? But what you see is, in verse 10, it says, "Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan towards Zoar was well watered like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abraham lived in the land of Canaan," right? Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the question that the commentators were saying, they were saying don't make Lot sinful, but I want to ask you guys, is Lot sinful for choosing this piece of land that was really nice? No? Yes? Anyone say yes? No, for most of us, we're like, no, not necessarily, right? I mean, if you look at Lot, he had a choice now. Abraham was like, very generous enough to say to his nephew, "Hey, nephew, I'm going to give you the choice first. What are you going to choose? Look at all the land, and then there's this really nice piece of land. What are you going to choose," right? If it was any of us, we'd probably do the same thing, right? We'd be like, "Oh, I see a really nice piece of land. I'm going to go there," right? And what you see with Lot is his decision is not necessarily sinful. It was just making the best out of what was in front of him, right? And I was looking at the kind of land around that area, and the land that Lot chose, it was a piece of land that was the most fertile land in all of that region. It was the best land. If anyone was to try to figure out where's the best land to take sheep and to grow the flock, it would be this land that Lot chose. So there's nothing really wrong with what Lot did, and yet, I want to share with you guys that there seems to be still a problem with what Lot did. And what was that problem? What's important about this is if you look in verse 12, it says that Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom, right? And what you see here is God made a promise to Abraham, right? God made a promise to Abraham. He said, "I'm going to give you guys the land of Canaan." And Lot was always with Abraham throughout the whole time. He knows about the promises of God. He knows that God had given Canaan to the land, to Abraham. And now that he has this option, he has to choose between Canaan or this land that's much more fertile. And, of course, it's not necessarily a sinful thing, but if you look at it, what is the main goal behind Lot's choice? Right? The main goal behind Lot's choice. If you're asking, why did Lot choose this land over Canaan? The answer is, it's because it was the best land to provide a better, to make his sheep grow, right? It was to make his life expand, right? To flourish more. The question that you have to ask is, the decisions that you make are not necessarily always going to be bad or good, right? The decisions that you make, what job you decide to go to, the person you decide to marry, all the decisions that you make in life, it's not always going to be so black and white and necessarily a sinful thing or a bad thing. But what you have to do is you have to check your heart. What is the decision-making process? What is that thing that's guiding your decision? What's the priority? And what you see in Lot is he doesn't care about the promise that God gave to Abraham, right? He doesn't care about all the things that happened until now. His only one focus is, what is going to help my sheep grow? That's the focus in his life. And what you see is Lot had the same type of ambition that any other person in the world would have had. It's an ambition for success, an ambition to grow, an ambition to get further in life, to achieve more. The world that we live in today is not that different from Lot's world. It's several, 1,000 years later, and we're still living in the same type of world, right? We live in a world where everyone is working to make progress, to make gains, to work, to achieve something, to get better in life. For those of you guys who are in Korea, and you guys haven't been here in Korea for a long time, guess what? Korea is one of the most competitive countries you can go to. Right? For you guys, maybe not as competitive, but for the Korean residents that are living in here, this is one of the most competitive countries that you can live in. And the resources are limited, right? There's not that much land in this nation, right? And so what do? You have to compete with each other. And I regret sometimes sharing things in my sermon, and the reason why I do is when I share, I realize that it makes you guys go out and do those things that I tell you guys about. I shared with you guys, I think, several weeks ago, maybe like a month or two ago, about a drama in Korea called Sky Castle. I just mentioned Sky Castle, and I'm gonna be really honest with you guys. I had only watched one episode, okay? But I shared with you guys Sky Castle, and then afterwards I found out that many of you guys had watched the whole thing, right? So I was like, I need to be careful what I talk about, right? But anyways, I'm gonna talk about Sky Castle again, and the reason why is not so that you can go watch it, all right? I'm not like, Sky Castle is a good drama. That's not my point. But what you do see is, for those of you guys who don't know, Sky Castle is a very dark drama that was made to depict kind of the competitiveness of the education world in South Korea. And it's very ridiculous, right? What the parents will go to, the lengths that they'll go to ensure that their child will make it into Seoul National University Medical School. Right? And some of the stories are very bizarre, right? You're like, it can't possibly happen. And you talk to a Korean and they're like, well, maybe in the top, top tier, top echelon of, Koreans, maybe that could be true. But what you see is, Korea is a land where there's so much competition. And the mantra of a Korean is not, I'll take care of the person next to you. It's, look out for me, right? I have no resources to share with anybody else. If I can get ahead of this person next to me in any way, I need to use that, right? There's a really sad story. I was talking with some pastor in the Sunday school, Korean side Sunday school ministry, and they were telling me, the church, sadly, is very similar to Sky Castle too. And they were sharing with me, and they were saying, if somebody were to find out, Pastor Sam, that you were good at English, you were a good English tutor, you know what they would do? I was like, what would they do? They were telling me the mothers would spread a very bad rumor about you. You know why? I want my child to learn from Pastor Sam, but nobody else. Get it? So you'd spread this rumor and be like, that Pastor Sam, like, he's very weird with kids, stay away from him, right? And while everybody else is scared of Pastor Sam, right? I send my kid. Why? Because I want to get ahead. And what you see is, this is the world. And I know we're like, oh, Korea is so terrible. But let me tell you, your country, the whole world, it's the same thing. We're trying to get ahead. We have to prove ourselves. We need to achieve something. If you don't achieve anything in your life, if you don't go ahead, if you don't make some kind of impact, you feel like your life is worthless. Right? But what's sad is that for many of us, even though we're in the church, even though we're Christians, what we do is we don't see a change in our DNA. We don't see a change in our mind thinking, in the way we see life. What you see is we use the same formula, except we say, God is on my side. I have to get there ahead of everybody else. But, you guys are all back there. I have God on my side, and He's pushing me forward. I'm probably talking about something that's very sensitive, but in many Korean churches, there is a very special prayer season in November. And what that prayer season is, it's the SAT season prayer, right? And as much as I don't want to be so judgmental about this, but you got to think about it. You got to really think about it, right? And you have to really think at the core of who I am. At the core of who I am I making God further my will, further my goals? Am I using God for my goals, or is my life really about God's goals? Right? And that's what we have to look at. Now, I'm not saying that Lot made a bad and sinful decision by choosing the best land in the whole region. He wasn't being sinful in that. And I'm not saying that in itself, he should have known that Sodom was an evil place. He shouldn't go. That's not the point. The point is, in Lot's life, what was his goal? His goal was, I don't care about my uncle Abraham. I don't care about the promises of God. I only care about my sheep and it growing. And the land that I see right now that's good for me is that land over there in Jordan. And I want to ask you guys, what is your decision-making process? If you call yourself a man or a woman of faith, you need to realize that something has to change inside of you. Your ambition can't be the same as everybody around you. When people see the decision-making that you have, they have to say, this is a strange person. They're not making the same decision that I would. What drives this person? Why is that person so different from me? What is their desire? What is their goal? Abraham was a strange person. A very strange person. In this passage, it says, in verse 8, Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. And the reason why Abraham is weird is him doing this was a very, very, very strange thing at that time. Israelite, Jewish, that region, the culture is very kind of Asian in its thinking. And if you think about Asian culture, right, the elders are the ones who get to decide, right? In Korea, if you are not Korean and there's an older person who says, oh, you can sit in the place of honor, right? They don't really mean it, right? I'm sorry, no, I'm just joking, right? That's just a joke, right? That's just a joke. But in Korea, right, a lot of times, people who are in elderly positions, they have to offer the spot. Why? Out of courtesy. But if you're a person who's very Korean in thinking, you'll be like, oh, no, please, you sit down, right? And in this position, when Abraham comes to Lot and says, hey, you take the first choice, right? The socially appropriate response of Lot would have been what? Oh, no, Uncle Abraham, no. You choose the best land, I'm okay, whatever land you choose, I'll go the other way, right? But what does Lot do? Right? He's that 눈치 없는 guy. He's just like, oh, okay, Abraham. Yes, this is my chance. I can get the best land, right? And for Abraham to do this, obviously it was not a wise thing to do. People around him would have been like, what's wrong with you? You know, Abraham had several options. He could have been like, hey, Lot, get out of here. There's not enough food, Lot, and I'm fed up with you. Get away. God has a promise for my people, but I don't know about you. Just go, right? He could have cast them out, right? He could have said, hey, Canaan stinks. We went to Egypt. Egypt was all right. Let's go somewhere else together, right? They could have gone somewhere else together. But what does Abraham do? He does something that's very strange. And he says, hey, Lot, I'm going to let you choose, right? And I was looking at what a couple of different pastors were saying about this passage, and one pastor, he said that Abraham had to choose between three relationships. The first relationship was his relationship with God. The second was his relationship with Lot, right, his nephew, and the third was his relationship with his sheep or his blessings, his money. He had to kind of forfeit one of them. If he wanted to forfeit his relationship with God, he would have told Lot, hey, I know God promised, Canaan, but we came back and the famine's still here. It's not good. Let's leave this place. I don't know what God's promises are, right? If he wanted to forfeit Lot, the relationship with Lot, he would have been like, get out of here, right? You don't belong here, right? Get out of here. But he would have said that. But what does Abraham do? His saying, Lot, you choose, is him saying, I still honor God's promise, and I still respect my relationship with you. I don't want to destroy these two. If I have to sacrifice anything, I'll sacrifice my wealth. I'll sacrifice my blessing so that I can preserve these two, right? And what you see with Abraham is he's strange. That's not what the normal person would do. And it's because he was driven by a different ambition. He wasn't following the same ambition as the rest of the world. His ambition was, God gave me a promise, and I'm going to stay in this land. I ran away to Egypt already. I figured out that, God wants me to stay in Canaan. And so he comes back to his tent. He stays in the tent. And he's like, I'm going to be here because God told me to be here. I want to ask you guys, look at yourselves. What is the decision-making process that you have? What ambition are you driven by? Is it driven by ambition to get ahead, right? Is it driven by ambition to prove your worth to other people? If I'm not worth it, then I can't stand the fact that I'm not going to be somebody. Are you driven by a desire for comfort? I need comfort in my life. Are you driven by a desire for a relationship? Is there somebody whose approval you just need in your life? We need to be people with a strange ambition. And what you see with Abraham is what mattered most to him now was he wanted to follow what God wanted out of his life. And I want to challenge you guys, let's become people who have a strange ambition. When everybody else says, we're going to go this way, be that person who says, no, God is telling me do this. Even if nobody else does it, God told me to do this, and so I'm going to do this. In our ministry, we have a couple of Korean brothers, and if you see the Korean brothers in our ministry, they're not the average Korean folk, all right? Let me just tell you that. There's one brother, and this brother recently, he's in an age where your first job really matters, right? Your first job really matters, and most people say you gotta stick with it, even though your job is tough, even though you don't understand, the system, everything, you gotta stick with it. Why? Because if you want to continue your career, right, you need to make a good impact with your first job, right? As time was passing by, this brother, he realized that he wanted to help people. He wanted to help people, and his work right now was not matching with this desire to help people. And so what did he do? He was like, I'm gonna start a startup. I'm gonna go and do an independent business. And my desire is to help people. And everybody around him told him, you don't have what it takes to do that, man. You're not experienced enough. And a lot of people discouraged him. They told him, you're just gonna ruin your life. Your prospects are gonna be so terrible. Don't do this, right? But this brother, he kept on feeling like God was telling him, hey, no, I need to do this. And so he went out. And he started an independent business. And as he was doing this, his vision was, I need to help people. And as I was looking at this brother, what's amazing about him is, even though this was a life that did not promise, right? Did not promise easy success. It was not the life of comfort and security. You know what?